She looked like not very well shaped, and so she was do that. Then we brought in Howard Kelton, who represented the tent club that used to get drunk and sleep over in the tent and burn the fire.
Literally did that, Jim.
Bud Edmonton's wife is here, and Bud was sort of probably the, I guess he was more like the ringmaster, the scoutmaster of the group. And Gene's got a number of her relatives, not all of them here because we didn't have a big enough tent. But Gene's going to do the show, and what's the date for our next one? Bill Power? What? 14th of August. 14th of August, Bill Power's going to do that. That one will be in the church because it's more related to, we need more screen, and we never anticipated we'd get this. And really, thanks for coming because it makes it really nice to have this live.
Good evening. Thank you all for coming out on such a hot night. As Jim said, my name is Jean, and I spent a pretty good portion of my youth on this beach in that building. And I've always known this old against the boat. I take pride in telling people that I am a Waterhouse. And I'm happy to see that there are a few other members of the Waterhouse family in attendance tonight. I'm here to tell you about the people who built the building and operated Waterhouses for nearly a century. My family, the Waterhouses of Lake Dunwoody. Although I now live in Middlebury, I grew up in Salisbury. In this house on West Shore Road. Just down the road, about 4 miles. Where my family lived for 48 years. Or perhaps it would be more accurate to say I grew up in Lake Dunmore. As a child, there was no place I would rather be from the end of May until the middle of September than at least this deep in my lake. And sometimes I actually thought of it as my lake because my roots run very deep in Lake Dunmore, and in particular in Waterhouse History. My paternal grandmother was Mary Frances Waterhouse History, the youngest daughter of William and Cecilia Waterhouse, and the granddaughter of Loyal and Delia Waterhouse. The history of the Waterhouse family in Salisbury, Vermont, begins with the formation of a group of proprietors in Salisbury, Connecticut. According to Old Town records, Joseph Waterhouse was named collector for the proprietors in 1763. At a town meeting held in Salisbury, Connecticut in 1765, Joseph was elected an assessor for Salisbury, Vermont for 1 year. James Waterhouse was named to a committee to lay out a road through Salisbury at the town meeting in 1785 and was elected clerk of the town meeting in 1788 and moderator in 1789. Listed among the freemen of Salisbury, Vermont between 1788 and 1790 were James Waterhouse, Abe Waterhouse, Joseph Waterhouse, and William Waterhouse. This presentation will focus on the members of the Waterhouse family with whom I'm the most familiar. My great-great-grandfather, Loyal Nelson Waterhouse, my great-grandfather, William Frederick Waterhouse, and William's daughters, Marion Waterhouse Benham, Margaret Waterhouse Dale, and Mary Waterhouse Edgerton. Loyal Waterhouse was born on July 11, 1826, in Middlebury, the sixth child and third son of Seymour Waterhouse and Deborah Alden Waterhouse. Loyal grew up in Salisbury. In 1848, gold was discovered at Sutter's Mill in Northern California, setting off the great migration of young men from all over the world to America's Western Territory. Loyal chose to follow the migration in 1850 when he was 24 years old. When I was a child, my grandmother told me about her two grandfathers who had been participants in the gold rush, Loyal Waterhouse and her maternal grandfather, Franklin Eli Cannon. Frank Cannon was born in Aurora, Ohio on December 22, 1822. According to the Cannon genealogy, Frank was educated in Cleveland, Ohio, and as a young man he moved to Marshall, Michigan to teach school. I had the privilege of being in Marshall about a year ago. He was living there in 1849 when he chose to join the rush for riches of California. Frank traveled to California with a group of other young men who called themselves the Wolverine Rangers. Frank made his fortune in California, not by panning for the elusive gold, but by selling mining supplies and provisions to the miners. He chose to settle in California, where he became a respected merchant and served a term in the state legislature. Frank married Elizabeth Fern in 1854 and they had one son. When Elizabeth died, Frank married Mary McGeechan in 1862. This union produced 6 children, including a daughter born June 10, 1871, whom they called Cecilia Jane. My grandmother knew that Loyal Waterhouse had kept a journal of his journey to California, and that the diary had been sold in the 1930s to a large university, but she didn't know which university had purchased it. Because of Grandma's stories, I was always fascinated by the gold rush, and I started to read about it. In the 1980s, I purchased a book entitled The World Rushed In by J.S. Holliday. The book turned out to be the journal of a young man named William Swain, who traveled to California from New York in 1849 with the Wolverine Rangers, the same group with whom Frank Cannon had made his journey. There were several references in that book to Frank Cannon, who William Swain referred to as a lieutenant in the Rangers. While checking the bibliography to see whether the author had used any primary source material for Frank Cannon, I discovered a reference to the journal of Loyal Nelson Waterhouse, which was housed in the library at Princeton University. You can imagine how excited I was to learn the location of that long-lost treasure. Unfortunately, my grandmother didn't live long enough for us to find it. But she would have been pleased. I was able to purchase a microfilm copy of it, from which I was able to make a hard copy and transcribe it. The journal, which was written in 2 small notebooks, begins on March 18, 1850 in Albany, Illinois, and ends with Loyal's arrival in Weavertown, California on July 27, 1850. Loyal's observances are primarily about the weather and the road conditions which he encountered on the trail, but also include his meetings with fellow travelers, with the Native Americans, and with the Mormons around Salt Lake City. He wrote about the difficulties he encountered in obtaining sufficient food and good water for himself and his horses, and fuel for fires to keep warm on cold nights in camp. He described the hardships he and others encountered, including illness and injuries. He spoke of passing the graves of other travelers who would never reach California, and he described the difficulties he encountered when his equipment broke down and he had to attempt repairs on the trail. He recorded the letters he received from family and friends after he reached California, and he kept a running account of his expenses in the final pages of his journal. Loyal soon returned to Vermont and married Delia Wheeler on August 3rd, 1852. They had two sons, Edward Carleton Waterhouse, who was born on January 5th, 1856, and Harry Eugene Waterhouse, who was born on September 10th, 1860. Unfortunately, diphtheria claimed the lives of both of the children. Edward on November 28, 1863, and Harry on February 13, 1864. Their third son, William Frederick Waterhouse, was born on April 26, 1864. In 1854, Loyal and Delia purchased a house and store at the intersection of Maple Street and Sneed Road, where Loyal operated a general store for a number of years. In 1876, Loyal was elected town clerk and treasurer of Salisbury, a position he held until his death. In the fall of 1878, Loyal and Delia purchased 50 acres of land and that large house overlooking Lake Dunmore. In the spring of 1888, they purchased this small parcel of land on the shore of Lake Dunmore, and in the summer of 1898, he took possession of the peninsula in Waterhouse's Bay, which was then known as Needle Point. Loyal and his son constructed this building and docks on the lake shore and opened a boat livery, a place where people could rent rowboats and canoes to cruise on the lake. We have several pictures. Over the years, a swimming beach and picnic area, as well as other outbuildings, were added. From sometime in the 1940s until the early 1960s, the Lake Dunmore Post Office was housed in the boathouse. The position of postmistress was held by Cecilia Waterhouse and two of her daughters, Marion and Margaret. Delia Waterhouse died on January 6, 1902, and Loyal on November 23, 1902. And they're both buried in the Salisbury Village Cemetery. William Frederick Waterhouse was born on April 26, 1864. He attended school in Salisbury and grew up above the store in the village and on the shores of Lake Dunmore. He worked with his father in the business which Loyal had established, known as Waterhouses. He became a boat builder and added to the fleet of rowboats which his father had begun. As a young man, he traveled to California to live with and work for his uncle, Horace Waterhouse, older brother of Loyal. There he met Cecilia Jane Cannon, the daughter of that other 49er, Franklin Eli Cannon. William and Cecilia were married on March 13, 1892, in Placer, California. Their first daughter, Marion Aline, was born in Iowa Hill, California on January 20th, 1893. When Marion was about 6 months old, William brought his young family to Salisbury, moved into a small cottage on his father's property, and took over the operation of the growing business from his aging father. Their second daughter, Margaret Delia, that's Margaret on the left, was born on April 15, 1896, and was followed by Mary Frances on December 1st, 1899. When Loyal died in 1902, William stepped into the position of town clerk and treasurer, and he continued to be elected to that position until his death. He also served a term in the Vermont legislature from 1904 to 1905. Will Waterhouse loved Lake Dunmore, and he loved meeting and interacting with the people who patronized Waterhouse. There are a lot of pictures of Will standing on the dock with various people. He loved meeting with them. Over the years, he purchased 2 large motorboats in which he gave tours of the lake. All summer, he would be found in the boathouse, on the dock, in his boats, wherever he could be close to his beloved lake. He enjoyed taking rowboat excursions with his family. He and Cecilia loved having their daughters and grandchildren nearby, and often hosted family gatherings at the homestead. Will Waterhouse died on May 7, 1931 in Salisbury. He and Cecilia, who died on May 20, 1940, are buried in Pine Hill Cemetery, Brandon. Like her grandfather and her father, Margaret Waterhouse loved her town and her lake. She and her sisters attended school in Salisbury and graduated from Middlebury High School, Margaret in 1914. She was a beautiful and intelligent young woman. After graduation, Margaret taught school in Salisbury. During World War I, while the young men of the county were fighting in Europe, Margaret and her sisters were asked to operate the Lake Dunmore power station. Their job included hiking to Silver Lake regularly, to monitor the penstock, and the equipment which allowed the water to flow from there down to the mountain and power the generators at the substation. I love this picture. I don't know when white kid high heel boots became the thing that you hiked to Silver Lake. When Will Waterhouse died in 1931, Margaret became town clerk and treasurer. Their dynasty lasted for 88 consecutive years. They were town clerks and treasurers from 1876 until 1964. For more than 30 years, Margaret operated and maintained Waterhouses and kept the town record in a small parlor located in the front of the family homestead. People who brought documents to her office to be recorded during the summer were likely to be told that they need not expect to receive them until after Waterhouse was closed for the season. But each of those documents was painstakingly copied into the record book in her beautiful handwriting, which unfortunately has been fading over the years. Margaret was a highly respected member of both the lake and the town community. She made friends easily. Some of her oldest and dearest friends were the ladies who spent their summers at the Lake Dunmore Hotel or in their private cottages around the lake. She loved nature and animals. She kept bird feeders near the windows where she could look out and enjoy the cardinals, the chickadees, the blue jays, and the other birds who came to eat the seeds. Squirrels were her nemesis because they ate all the seed which was meant for her beautiful birds. She also kept birds inside the house, cages full of tiny finches and bright yellow canaries. I remember fondly the cheerful sound of those lively little birds. She always had a small dog whom she spoiled completely. There was a whole series of little dogs, Ken and Cherry. They were all very spoiled. In the spring of 1964, Margaret made the difficult decision to retire, both from her town responsibilities and, sadly, from Waterhouses. She sold everything to Celie and Anna Reynolds. She had purchased a small parcel of land just south of the house, and she built a small house on that parcel with the intention of making it her new home. But in October 1964, she married her old friend Howard Gale and moved into his home beside the school in Salisbury Village. Despite the fact that they were both in their late 60s at the time of their wedding, they were married for very nearly 25 years. They called each other affectionately Ma and Pa. Howard died in February 1989 and is buried beside his first wife, Grace. Margaret lived on alone in their home for as long as she was able, but increasingly frail health made it necessary for her to move into elderly housing. She died in Rutland on January 13, 1994, at the age of 97, and is buried beside her parents in Brandon. With her death, the family name Waterhouse disappeared from the voting lists in Salisbury after more than 200 years. Margaret's older sister, Marion, married Harry Denham, and they raised their 2 children in the big white house behind the village school. In their later years, Marion and Harry spent winters in Florida, and Marion died there in June 1931. My grandparents, Mary Waterhouse and Bill Edgerton, were married on April 30, 1923. They bought the house where I grew up and where my father, Elmer, who was known as Bud, and 3 of his 5 sisters were born. Bill farmed nearly 90 acres. In the early 1930s, Bill went to work for Hortonia Power Company, which was later absorbed by Central Vermont Public Service Corporation, and moved his family to Rutland, where 2 more daughters were born. In 1950, he was offered the opportunity to operate the Salisbury substation and move into a large house on what was then known as Battle Street, it's now Smead Road, which the company owned. Later that year, he and Mary purchased the house and lived there until 1974, when they built a small house on a piece of land on West Shore Road, which they had kept when they sold the farm. They continued to live there until their death. Mary died on November 6, 1985, and Bill on January 16, 1994, just 3 days after Margaret's death. Bill and Mary are buried in the Holman Cemetery. Waterhouses has continued to thrive in the intervening years. It was a wonderful place to grow up. There were always many other children for us to swim with. My siblings spent all day, every day here in the summer. I recently told someone that we had only 2 requirements for summer vacation: a bathing suit and a bicycle to transport us to and from Waterhouses. In the summer that I was 13, Aunt Margaret decided that I needed a job. to keep me out of trouble when I wasn't swimming. She installed me in the bathhouse, which a lot of you will remember was right over in that area, where I collected the beach fee of 15 cents, or 25 cents if the customer wanted a basket to keep their clothes in while they swam. She paid me the princely sum of 25 cents an hour. And I was sublimely happy to spend my summer on the beach. I had that job every summer until I graduated from high school. Those of us who loved her knew that Aunt Margaret was a fun-loving, kind, and intelligent woman who loved her family, her community, and her lake. She was intensely proud of her ancestry, and she passed that pride along to her nieces and nephews and her grandnieces and grandnephews. The Waterhouse family has not completely disappeared from Salisbury, although no one named Waterhouse still lives here. My cousins, June Denis and Martha Denny, still live in town. June recently told me that her son, Zachary, is working here. And June, after we spoke, I realized that Zach represents the 6th generation of the Waterhouse family to work in this business. My family loves to get together from time to time for reunions, and we always hang a large banner which proclaims those gatherings as the Waterhouse Edgerton Family Reunion. This photo was taken at my grandparents' old house on Smead Road, which is now a vacation rental. And we've rented it a couple of times for family reunions. It's been great fun to be back in the old house. My sister puts together a team every year to participate in Relay for Life, and they're known as the Waterhouse Edgerton Family Team. And one of my brothers named his son Patrick Waterhouse Edgerton. Needless to say, we're all very proud of our Waterhouse heritage, and we know that the legacy of the Waterhouse family will live on around Lake Dunmore for many years to come. Thank you. We have more pictures for you to see, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. I'd also be happy to have people stand up and give their reminiscences of Waterhouses. Thank you.
Gene, I'd like to compliment you for continuing your speech with armies of children out there. People screaming and yelling, you never lost your place.
I think we developed that when we were both working here. We could yell back and forth between the buildings. Yes.
That was excellent job.
Thank you. One of the things that I began to study a little bit when I was putting this together was, I'll call it the evolution of this building, which started out as a little narrow one-lane building with porches on all 4 sides. And over the years, the porches have gradually become lean-tos, and we're left with only the porch on the front and the porch on the back, basically. As the business grew, the building grew.
Before there was a boat launch out there, there's one gentleman came up and spoke to us. Then you could go on Hoffman.
I think it was Hudge DuBois who was talking about Hoffman's Cottages, which was over where the state access area is now. And Hudge, you said you knew the Hoffmans?
Yeah, I'd like to thank you too for doing such a great job.
Thank you.
And before I say anything about Waterhouses, I really wanted show my appreciation to the Salisbury Historical Society for the wonderful job they did at the Memorial Park. I'm a veteran that went in from Salisbury, and you did a wonderful job. It's a beautiful place, and you deserve a lot of credit.
Mark yourself.
Before I talk about Hoffman's, I'd just like to make another point that Margaret Waterhouse signed my birth certificate in 1934 as town clerk, and yours too.
And Ralph.
And speaking of, you mentioned the Lake Dunmore Post Office being at Waterhouses.
Yeah.
I remember George Mayhew, who was the father of Emma Peterson, whose husband ran the Salisbury Post Office. And George Mayhew used to get the mail at the West Salisbury Railroad Station, Depot, and I would stand there as a kid, and the trains never stopped. They'd put the bag out, and as the train went by, they'd grab the bag, and they'd throw the Salisbury mail out of the box. And then George would deliver it to Salisbury and to the Lake Dunmore address up here. And on Hoffman's, I have a lot of good memories there because Hoffman's camp went where the access area is now, the cottages. They had a restaurant up where the entrance is by the access area, where the access area is now. And Mrs. Hoffman was the greatest cook. And they had a nice restaurant there. And Mr. Hoffman was a great fisherman on Lake Dunmore, and he had all of his stuffed trophies inside the restaurant of the lake trout and salmon he's caught on Lake Dunmore. And then they had a number of cottages going down. The other thing that I'll always remember is that as a little kid I used to fish with a stick. And my dad brought me up to Mr. Hoffman's store one day, who sold a lot of fishing tackle, and bought my first telescopic fishing pole, which was a big treat. So again, thank you.
Thank you. And just as an aside on Mrs. Hoffman, she was a very, very tall woman. And when Hoffman's cottages closed down and they were tearing down the cottages, they moved the house that had been the restaurant down into Salisbury Village. And it sat on the site where Dick Gale's house is now. And my brother and his wife rented the house. And Tom, you remember that the sinks were so high?
Oh yeah, they had the
cabinets were so high.
Yeah. Everything. She had to have been easily 7 foot tall. Just, it's like when we moved into the place, they had taken and actually made a cement 4 inch or 5 inch wall underneath the toilet to jack the toilet up that way. So when I went in and sat down on the toilet, it's like, I feel like my feet were like this. So I ended up having to make a little deck around the toilet so that I put my feet on the ground. But the counters were all up here like this, and to her they were waist, but everybody else they were clear up here. So yeah.
Tom and I spent many years meeting many people here, and I think one of those people that we met over those years is here tonight. Are you Jim Myersson?
Myersburg.
Myersburg, I'm sorry. Yep. Yeah.
As a young boy living in Middlebury and finding out how much fun you could have at Lake Dunmore in the summer.
Don't go into too much depth.
No, I won't go into detail. But the one thing I wanted to say is, if the game wardens or the state police were on the lake when we were on the lake water skiing, we wouldn't have lasted 2 minutes. We used to launch off the dock over here, standing on the dock, take off. First thing you do is go up to the North Bay as fast as you could go in the North Bay as fast as you could, water skiing there, coming as close to shore as possible, just doing things, and then coming back here, and everybody tried to let go just in time so you could just ski over to the dock and sit down without getting wet. Of course, that the boat had to be coming in, going like hell to make the turn. It was totally. They were great summers. And I remember all of the Edgertons. I remember your father skiing behind his boat.
Yep.
Mark Reynolds, Bernard Cannell, Gary Cannell.
The my guy.
It was great. Great place to grow up.
I saw Bernard here.
He was
He's back in.
He's dining.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You didn't have the opening
I
in
just
the island.
No,
Like we did when we were teenagers. And our big thing was still going up to the North Bay and turning around up there at full speed, coming here, turn around and go back out with a skier on the back. See them go out.
Yeah. Yes.
And I have a factual question. What was Zachary's last name?
Oh, Denise.
How do you spell it?
D-E-N-I-S.
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 Thank you.
Hi.
Could you just talk about the pictures a little bit? Bill, I know.
Is Bill's running through them?
Well, no, I'm not the details so much, but the collections. These are yours and Bill's
They're
pictures.
actually kind of a conglomeration. Some are my collection and some are Bill's. I think more are Bill's than mine.
They're great pictures.
I quote unquote inherited a big chest full of family portraits and wonderful old pictures of Waterhouses and of the lake from Aunt Margaret.
What year would that picture be from? What year?
This one here,
This one?
this is about 1910, give or take.
Yeah, right about there. I think this is, that's Will Waterhouse in the boat in the middle. And I think this is his daughter Marion in this little boat.